You achieved something today. Maybe it was small. Maybe it was significant. Maybe you finished something you had been working on for weeks. Maybe someone complimented your work, your appearance, your effort, your character. And for a brief moment, maybe half a second, maybe a little longer, something inside you almost felt it. Almost. And then the voice arrived. It wasn't that good. Anyone could have done that. They're just being polite. Wait until they see the real you. You got lucky. It won't last. And just like that, the achievement dissolved. The compliment bounced off. The moment passed through your fingers before you could hold it, and you moved on to the next thing, working harder, trying more, pushing further, hoping that this time, this next achievement, this next milestone, this next level of success will finally be enough. But it never is. And the most painful part is not the striving. The most painful part is the quiet, persistent, bone-deep feeling that no matter what you do, no matter how much you achieve, no matter how many people tell you otherwise, you are simply not good enough. You have felt this way for so long that it feels like the truth, like a fact about who you are, like something you were born knowing. But it is not the truth. It is not a fact. And you were absolutely not born knowing it. You were taught it. And today, we are going to find out exactly how, exactly why, and exactly what you can do about it. Stay with me. Let's start by naming what we are actually talking about. Because not feeling good enough is a phrase people use casually, but the psychological reality behind it is anything but casual. What we are describing is a deeply held core belief. And core beliefs are not surface-level thoughts that come and go. They are foundational assumptions about yourself, about other people, and about the world, that were formed early in life and that operate largely beneath conscious awareness. A core belief is not something you think, it is something you know, or at least something that feels like knowing, so deep and so automatic that it never gets questioned. It simply gets confirmed again and again by the way you interpret every experience that comes your way. The specific core belief we are talking about today goes by several names in psychology. Psychologists call it conditional self-worth, the unconscious belief that your value as a person is conditional, that it depends on what you do, what you achieve, what you look like, how much you earn, how useful you are, how successful you become, or whether other people approve of you. The opposite of conditional self-worth is unconditional self-worth, the deep inner knowing that you have value simply because you exist, not because of what you do, not because of what you achieve, simply because you are a human being and human beings have inherent worth. Most people reading this have conditional self-worth, and it shows up in very specific, very recognizable ways. It shows up as the inability to rest without guilt. Because if your worth depends on your productivity, then rest feels like worthlessness. It shows up as the compulsive need for external validation, for praise, for likes, for approval, because your internal sense of worth is too fragile or too absent to sustain itself. It shows up as perfectionism. Because if you are only as worthy as your last achievement, then every achievement had better be flawless. And it shows up as that persistent, exhausting, never quite satisfied feeling that no matter how much you do, it is never quite enough. Here is the question that matters most. Where does this feeling come from? Because you were not born feeling inadequate. No infant comes into the world believing they are not good enough. Babies do not apologize for needing to be fed. Toddlers do not feel guilty for wanting attention. Small children, before the world has had its say, have a completely natural and uncomplicated sense of their own value. Something happens, something teaches them otherwise, and that something is almost never one dramatic event. It is usually a slow, quiet accumulation of experiences, messages, and environments, often so ordinary that the people delivering them had absolutely no idea of the impact they were having. Let's walk through the most common origins. The first origin is conditional love and approval in childhood. When a child's sense of being loved and valued is tied, even subtly, to their performance, their behavior, their grades, their appearance, or their compliance, they learn a devastating lesson. Love is not unconditional. I am only lovable when I am good enough. And since no child is perfect and no child can be good enough all the time, they grow up with a persistent, low-level terror that they are fundamentally unlovable as they actually are. The second origin is criticism without balance. Children who grew up in environments where criticism was frequent and praise was rare, or where achievements were acknowledged briefly and mistakes were analyzed at length, develop an internal critic modeled on those external voices. The critic moves inside, and it never stops talking. The third origin is comparison. Why can't you be more like your brother? Your sister never has this problem. Look at what the neighbor's children are achieving. Constant comparison communicates one devastating message. You are not enough as you are. You need to be someone else. The fourth origin is emotional neglect. This one is subtle and often invisible because it is defined not by what was done, but by what was absent. Children who grew up in homes where their emotions were not acknowledged, not validated, or not welcomed, where they were told to stop crying, to toughen up, to not be so sensitive, learned that their inner world was not acceptable. And if your inner world is not acceptable, then the deepest parts of who you are not acceptable either. The fifth origin is cultural and societal messages. We live in cultures and societies that measure human worth almost exclusively through external metrics: wealth, beauty, status, productivity, and success. These messages begin in early childhood and intensify through adolescence and adulthood. They tell us, constantly and comprehensively, that we are only as valuable as what we produce and what we possess. None of these origins are your fault. Not a single one of them reflects a truth about your inherent worth. They are simply experiences that taught your developing nervous system a false and painful lesson. And that lesson became a belief, and that belief became a voice, and that voice has been with you ever since. By now, you understand where the feeling comes from. But let's talk about the mechanism that keeps it alive. Day after day, year after year, long after the original environments and experiences are gone. That mechanism is the inner critic. The inner critic is the internal voice, or more accurately, the internal commentary that evaluates, judges, criticizes, and finds fault with who you are, what you do, and how you measure up to an impossible standard. Every person has an inner critic to some degree. It is a normal feature of human psychology. But for people who grew up with the origins we just described, conditional love, constant criticism, comparison, neglect, cultural pressure, the inner critic is not a gentle nudge towards self-improvement. It is a relentless, harsh, often cruel voice that operates constantly and automatically. Here is what is important to understand about where the inner critic comes from. The inner critic is not your own voice. It is an internalized voice. It is the accumulated echo of every critical parent, teacher, peer, coach, or cultural message that told you at a formative age that you were not measuring up. Your developing brain absorbed those voices and installed them as an internal guidance system, because at that age, the adults around you were your reference point for reality. If they said you were not good enough, your brain concluded that it must be true. The cruel irony is that the inner critic was originally installed to help you. It was an attempt by your developing mind to anticipate criticism and avoid it before it could hurt you again. Criticize yourself before others can. Set impossible standards so that you are always pushing to be better. Stay vigilant for your own flaws before someone else notices them. This was a form of protection, but it became a prison. And here is what the inner critic does to your daily life. It narrates your failures in real time. It predicts rejection before it happens. It dismisses your successes as luck and attributes your failures to your fundamental inadequacy. It compares you unfavorably to everyone around you. It sets standards that shift upward the moment you reach them, so that the goalpost of enough is always just out of reach. And it speaks with such authority, such certainty, such familiarity, that most people never even question whether it is telling the truth. It is not telling the truth. It has never told the truth. It has only ever told you the story it was taught, by people who were themselves taught it by people who were taught it before them. One of the most common and most misunderstood consequences of not feeling good enough is perfectionism. And I want to challenge the way most people think about perfectionism, because in our culture, perfectionism is often presented as a virtue, a strength, something to be proud of. "I'm a bit of a perfectionist," is said with a smile in job interviews. It is treated as evidence of high standards, dedication, and ambition. But clinical perfectionism, the kind that grows out of not feeling good enough, is not a strength. It is a coping mechanism, and underneath it is a great deal of pain. Here is the psychology of perfectionism driven by inadequacy. The unconscious logic goes like this: if I can be perfect, if I can eliminate all my flaws, all my mistakes, all my imperfections, then I will finally be safe from criticism. Then I will finally be worthy. Then I will finally be enough. So the person works twice as hard as necessary. They check their work 5 times. They rehearse conversations. They agonize over decisions that others make in seconds. They avoid anything they cannot do well, because attempting and failing feels like proof of their fundamental inadequacy. They find it nearly impossible to celebrate their achievements, because the moment one is complete, the standard shifts and the next mountain appears. The perfectionist is not chasing excellence for the joy of it. They are running from the terror of being found inadequate, and perfectionism has a built-in guarantee of suffering. Because perfection is not possible. It has never been possible. Which means the perfectionist is running on a treadmill that never stops, working harder and harder, achieving more and more, and never, ever arriving at the destination of enough. The exhaustion this creates is profound, and it is invisible, because from the outside, the perfectionist looks capable, driven, and successful. The internal experience could not be more different. Perfectionism driven by inadequacy also kills creativity, spontaneity, and joy. Because nothing can be attempted lightly. Nothing can be done for the pleasure of doing it. Everything carries the weight of proof. Proof that you are or are not worthy of taking up space. Not feeling good enough does not stay quietly inside you. It reaches outward into every relationship you have and shapes those relationships in ways that are often deeply painful and very difficult to understand from inside them. Here is how it shows up in relationships. It shows up as the inability to receive love fully. When someone loves you, genuinely, consistently, unconditionally, and you do not believe at a deep level that you are worthy of love, you cannot fully receive it. You hold it at arm's length. You question it. You wait for it to be withdrawn. You look for the catch. You push the person away before they can leave, because leaving first feels safer than being left. It shows up as people-pleasing. When your worth depends on other people's approval, then keeping people happy becomes a survival mission. You say yes when you mean no. You shrink yourself to fit what others seem to want. You become hyper-aware of other people's emotional states and constantly adjust yourself to manage them. You prioritize everyone else's needs and steadily abandon your own. And you call this kindness, when really it is self-erasure driven by the belief that your authentic self is not acceptable. It shows up as jealousy and comparison. When your worth is conditional and comparative, other people's success does not feel neutral. It feels threatening. If they are more successful, more attractive, more accomplished, more liked, then by the logic of conditional worth, you are less. Every comparison becomes a referendum on your value. It shows up as tolerating poor treatment. People who do not feel worthy of love and respect have enormous difficulty leaving relationships, even deeply harmful ones, because some part of them believes that this is what they deserve, that something better is not available to someone like them. That being in a bad relationship is better than confirming their deepest fear, that they are fundamentally unlovable. And it shows up as difficulty being truly known. Intimacy requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires the belief that your authentic self, including your flaws, your fears, your failures, is acceptable and lovable. When you believe you are not good enough, genuine intimacy feels terrifying. Because if someone truly sees you, all of you, they will confirm what you have always suspected. And so you keep parts of yourself hidden. And the relationship, no matter how warm on the surface, never reaches the depth that both people hunger for. If not feeling good enough is a wound, then social media is salt poured directly into it, every single day. Let's talk about comparison, because comparison is one of the most powerful engines of inadequacy in modern life. The human brain is wired to compare. It is an evolutionary feature, not a flaw. Our ancestors needed to know where they stood in their social group because social standing was directly linked to survival. Being included in the group meant safety. Being excluded meant danger. The brain learned to measure itself constantly against others and to feel anxiety when it appeared to be falling short. But our ancestors compared themselves to the people in their immediate environment, a village of perhaps 150 people. People whose real lives, struggles, failures, bad days, and imperfections were fully visible. Social media has taken that comparison drive and pointed it at a curated global highlight reel of the most attractive, most successful, most interesting presentations of millions of people's lives. You are comparing your complete internal experience, your doubts, your failures, your worst days, your most unflattering angles, to everyone else's most carefully selected external presentation. It is not a fair comparison. It has never been a fair comparison. And for someone who already believes they are not good enough, it is devastating. Every scroll confirms the narrative the inner critic has been running. Look at what they have achieved. Look at how they look. Look at how together their life appears. And then look at you. But here is what you are not seeing behind those posts. You are not seeing the 10 photos taken before the one that got posted. You are not seeing the debt behind the luxury. You are not seeing the relationship problems behind the couple photo. You are not seeing the anxiety, the self-doubt, the hard days, and the private struggles of people who from the outside appear to have everything together. Everyone is fighting a battle that their Instagram grid does not show. And measuring your worth against an illusion is one of the most reliable ways to ensure that you will never feel good enough. No matter how much you achieve, no matter how far you grow, and no matter how worthy you actually are. Let's look briefly at what is actually happening in the brain of someone who chronically does not feel good enough, because the neuroscience is both fascinating and deeply validating. The brain has a network called the default mode network, or DMN. This is the network that becomes active when the brain is not focused on an external task. When you are daydreaming, when you are reflecting on the past or imagining the future, when your mind wanders. Research has shown that in people with chronic low self-worth, the default mode network is heavily weighted towards self-critical and self-referential processing. In plain language, when your mind wanders, it wanders toward criticism of yourself. It is the default. It is what the brain returns to when nothing else is demanding its attention. The amygdala, your brain's threat detection center, also plays a significant role. For people with deep-seated inadequacy, social situations and performance situations activate the amygdala in the same way that physical threats do. The possibility of being judged, criticized, or found lacking registers in the brain as a genuine threat to survival, which is why shame and social rejection feel so physically overwhelming. And there is the role of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. When your self-worth is conditional and tied to achievement and approval, your dopamine system becomes highly dependent on external rewards. You get a hit of dopamine from a compliment, from a like, from an achievement. But the hit is brief, and the baseline, the resting level of self-regard, remains low. So you go chasing the next external reward to feel okay again. This creates a neurological cycle that mirrors addiction. The person is not lazy or shallow for needing validation. Their brain has been wired to depend on it. And finally, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-reflection, perspective-taking, and rational self-evaluation. In people with chronic inadequacy, this region struggles to effectively challenge the inner critic because the inner critic's beliefs are stored so deeply and activated so automatically that rational counter-arguments rarely reach them. This is why simply being told, "you are good enough," does not work, and why simply deciding to think more positively does not work. The belief lives below the level at which rational thinking operates. Healing it requires something deeper than logic. Now, the most important part of this entire conversation. What actually changes this? What genuinely moves the needle on a core belief that has been running since childhood? Because I want to be honest with you here. Affirmations alone do not change core beliefs. Positive thinking alone does not change core beliefs. Being told you are good enough, even by people who mean it with all their hearts, does not change core beliefs. Core beliefs change through experience, through repeated, emotionally significant experiences that contradict the belief at a deep enough level that the nervous system begins to update its model of reality. Here is what that actually looks like. The first step is awareness, making the invisible visible. You cannot challenge a belief you do not know you hold. The starting point is simply recognizing, without judgment, that this belief is operating, that the inner critic is not the truth, that the voice saying "you are not enough" is a learned voice, not an accurate one. Naming it creates distance from it, and distance is the beginning of freedom. The second step is tracing it back. Where did this belief come from? This is not about blame, it is about understanding. When you can see that the feeling of inadequacy was taught to you by specific experiences, specific messages, specific environments, it begins to lose its authority. It stops feeling like a fact about who you are and starts feeling like a story you were given. And stories can be revised. The third step is compassionate self-witnessing. This is perhaps the most radical thing a person who does not feel good enough can do. Learning to relate to themselves with the same warmth, patience, and compassion that they would offer a close friend or a child in pain. Psychologist Kristin Neff has done extensive research on self-compassion and found that it is one of the most powerful antidotes to shame and inadequacy. not self-indulgence, not pretending things are fine, but genuine, warm, honest kindness toward yourself. The fourth step is separating doing from being. Your worth as a human being is not the same as the quality of your work, your productivity, your achievements, or your performance. These are things you do. They are not who you are. Learning to make this distinction, slowly, repeatedly, with practice, begins to dissolve the foundation of conditional self-worth. The fifth step is choosing relationships that reflect your worth back to you accurately. The people around you function as mirrors. If you are surrounded by people who are critical, dismissive, or who relate to you conditionally, they will reinforce the belief. Choosing relationships, friendships, communities, therapeutic relationships, where you experience being seen, valued, and accepted as you actually are, is not a luxury. It is a core component of healing. The sixth step is professional support. Schema therapy, which works directly with core beliefs formed in childhood, has strong evidence for changing deep-seated patterns of inadequacy. So does compassion-focused therapy. So does well-delivered psychodynamic therapy. These approaches do not just teach you to think differently, they help you have the kinds of deeply corrective emotional experiences that actually update the belief at the level where it lives. Before we close, I want to speak to you directly, not to a general audience, to you. If you have been walking through life carrying the quiet, persistent weight of not feeling good enough, I want you to know something. That feeling has a history. It was not handed to you at birth as a verdict on your worth. It was constructed, piece by piece, by experiences, by voices, by environments that did not give you what you needed, or that actively gave you messages you should never have received. And the fact that you have carried it for so long, the fact that you have continued to show up, to try, to achieve, to love, to contribute, to function, while carrying that weight, is not evidence of your inadequacy. It is evidence of extraordinary resilience. Think about what it takes to keep going when a voice inside you is telling you that you are not enough. To keep trying when you cannot celebrate your own successes. To keep loving when you do not feel worthy of being loved in return. To keep creating when the inner critic dismisses everything you make. That is not the behavior of someone who is not good enough. That is the behavior of someone who is deeply, quietly, persistently brave. You have been enough this whole time. The voice that says otherwise is not the truth. It never was. And if there is one thing I hope you take from this video, not just intellectually, but somewhere deeper than that, it is this: your worth is not something you earn. It is not something you perform. It is not something that can be taken away by a failure, a criticism, a rejection, or a bad season. It is not conditional on your productivity, your appearance, your relationships, or your bank account. Your worth is inherent. It came with you when you arrived. It has been there every single day that you have been alive. And no voice, inside or outside of you, has the authority to revoke it. Let's bring everything together. Not feeling good enough is not a personality trait. It is not a character flaw. It is not the truth about who you are. It is a core belief, formed early, reinforced consistently, and maintained by an inner critic that was installed to protect you but became a prison. It comes from specific, identifiable origins: conditional love, criticism, comparison, emotional neglect, and cultural messages that tied human worth to human output. It shows up in perfectionism, in people-pleasing, in the inability to receive love, in comparison, in self-sabotage, and in the exhausting, never-ending pursuit of an enough that keeps moving. And it can change, not through positive thinking alone, not through affirmations alone, but through awareness, through compassion, through the right relationships and the right support. and through the repeated experience of being seen, valued, and accepted as you actually are. Here is your challenge for today. The next time you achieve something, however small, resist the inner critic for just 30 seconds. Do not immediately move to the next thing. Do not immediately look for the flaw. Just allow yourself to acknowledge it. To say, out loud if possible, I did that, and it was enough. 30 seconds. That is all. Because healing does not happen in one dramatic moment of insight. It happens in 30-second choices, repeated over time, that slowly teach your nervous system a different story about who you are. If this video resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because someone in your life is quietly carrying this exact weight, and they deserve to know that it was never the truth. Thank you for watching the Health Sketchpad. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one.